Yes, I think the goal and the strategy here are in a way two different things, in that the general goal that Germany has is rather similar to the goals of, let's say, Ukraine and the West as a whole, but the strategy that Germany has been pursuing for the last 30 years has now come under critique, in that the so far attempts of Germany to integrate Russia into the Western community of values, and somehow to be a mediator between Ukraine and Ukraine and Russia have largely failed, and also between Russia and other countries like Georgia and Moldova. And so what we have now indeed in Germany is a crisis of what is called Ostpolitik, a large questioning within the public discourse of the previous prerogatives of German foreign affairs thinking and acting. And it seems to be now that maybe the situation is better than many think in Ukraine, in that German foreign policy discourse, and especially the view of Eastern Europe, is actually changing, and it's becoming more similar to that of such countries as Poland, the US, Canada. It's not yet there, but it has been moving, I would say, in the right direction, which is something in a way perhaps paradoxical to say for me, because I have been criticizing very much over the last couple of years, especially German foreign affairs, in reviews of Merkel's foreign policy, in reviews of the interdependence theory application in German Ostpolitik, and also in a call that I've organized of 73 German experts, where we harshly criticized the German approach towards the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. So on the whole, it is, I think, now in flux, the German foreign policy towards Ukraine and Russia. And I'm not yet sure where we will come out of this current change, of course, but I think it's changing for the better. Overall, I would say yes. I think that obviously here the Green Party has been already for quite a while closer to the Ukrainian position and to the North American position, or the North European position than before. I mean, closer to the position of such countries as the US, Canada, Great Britain, and Sweden, to take just a few. So again, I would say the glass is here half full rather than half empty. This change is happening. It's probably not happening as quickly as one would wish, but these new ministers, and also the chancellor, actually is changing. And Scholz is here in a different position than Baerbock and Habeck, in that he comes from a party that has a rather different foreign policy tradition, that has a whole historical mythology about a sort of conciliatory approach that Germany should have towards the Soviet Union, and then also later towards the Russian Federation. So the latest, I would say, things that Scholz and also the new party leader Lars Klingbeil have been saying about Russia and about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict are probably from, let's say, from a Canadian perspective, or from a Ukrainian perspective, not sufficiently hawkish, but they have moved quite a long way from earlier positions, not just of Gerhard Schröder, but of the sort of mainstream of the Social Democratic Party, that had a very different approach towards Russia. So I think they are actually doing quite well, given the historical the historical ballast and also the public opinion that is pacifist and that limits also the politicians that sometimes have a more hawkish approach than the population in general towards certain world political affairs, including now the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. It's difficult to make an absolutely certain forecast, but what I've heard from the German political leaders over the last 2 to 3 weeks, I found rather encouraging, and there was a lot of emphasis of the unity of the West, of a transatlantic unity, of European unity. So I actually expect that as a result of a large escalation of the war in Ukraine to actually Germany closing ranks with the other Western powers, especially with the US. So actually for that particular scenario, I'm pretty optimistic. I think that then the sort of pacifism of Germans could actually play into the hands of, so to say, of Ukraine and of the US and Canada and these countries, because so far I think the German pacifism has been a problem for Ukraine, in that Germans refuse to see the plain realities of war. But if we have an open invasion of Russia with regular forces on a large scale in the next days, then actually I think Germany will be fully in this Western alliance and will fully support the Western sanctions, and among others, Nord Stream 2 will be dead if that happens. I think a much more problematic situation in a way for Western unity would be what happens if there's no large-scale invasion, if it's a continuation of this sort of hybrid methods, combination of, let's say, smaller military action with non-military action. Because then it will be difficult to decide, is that now actually, the casus belli, so to say, for the large sanctions that have been already formulated, or is that something below the threshold of large sanctions? So that will be, in a way, the more problematic scenario, as odd as that may sound. I've mentioned already one restriction for German foreign policy activity and even thinking, that is widespread pacifism and in a belief in sort of non-military methods, even in the case of to solve even a military aggression and to respond to a military aggression. Another problem, so to say, for German politicians is this whole mythology about the so-called new Eastern policies of the Social Democrats in the 1970s. There is a widespread belief that somehow the more conciliatory approach that Germany has taken in the early 1970s vis-à-vis the Soviet Union somehow contributed then to perestroika and the new political thinking of Gorbachev. And a third restraint that I think is sometimes also forgotten is that Germany, for better or worse, is linked economically to Russia in a number of ways, not just in terms of energy delivery, but also there are many companies still in Russia that have invested, not just large companies, but also smaller companies. Lots of German representatives in Russia, also Russian presence in Germany, economic presence is important, as Russia has been also an investor, especially in East Germany. And so there is something for Germany here to lose in a confrontation, much more to lose than for Great Britain or for Canada or for the US. So one has to consider this, that the price that the Germans will be paying in such a larger confrontation is higher, and that's why they have a tendency to look for the possibility of concessions, compromise, and avoiding actually conflict. The situation has changed for the better in the last 8 years. There has been a certain surge of Ukrainian studies, of interest in Ukraine, but there's still, for instance, no Ukrainian Institute in Germany. So we have, for instance, at least 4 Polish institutes in Germany, and we have even a Moldova Institute in Leipzig, but we don't have yet Ukrainian institutes. We have a number of centers of Ukrainian studies, like in Greifswald, Frankfurt-Oder, in Berlin to a certain degree, in Munich, but we don't yet have really a publicly active and visible Ukrainian institute that would be sort of speaking on behalf of Ukraine in public. So that is still a problem, but I think that has actually somewhat, the significance of this problem has somewhat declined in the last 2 months, I would say, because of the perception that Putin is really aggressive towards Ukraine, and there has been actually an outburst, I would say, of sympathy for Ukraine in the last 2 months with the massing of these troops and the aggressive rhetoric of Putin. So actually, there's now a lot of sympathy now for Ukraine in Germany that has not been to that degree there before, which sort of compensates a little bit for the lack of knowledge about Ukraine, if you like. But there's also now, within the last actually weeks, there has been a surge of interest for Ukraine. The newspapers are full of articles about Ukraine. So so that is actually rapidly improving now. That is also one of the sort of effects of Putin's aggressiveness towards Ukraine. Mm. Well, you know, I'm not a big, I've never been a director of a program or of an institute or of an office or something like that. I've been offered sort of a couple of times these sort of positions, and well, I'm still living in Kiev, so, you know, and I don't want to leave Kiev, actually. You know, my personal interests come here in play as well, and I mean, you know, this is perhaps a good project, but it would demand time and energy, and also some sort of administrative, I don't know, professionalism that, frankly, I don't think I have, and I don't want to be drawn into this sort of administrative work that fundraising and you know, setting up an institute really involves. I'm also not sure that works in this way in Germany, you know, that somebody takes there has to be some sort of other way to do that. We don't have oligarchs in that way in Germany. Usually this is all done through foundations. It's usually a highly sort of regulated process. You know, I've studied in the past, actually, I've done research on how North American foundations and German foundations are giving out money in Ukraine, and there's a very big difference in style of the American foundations that are much more trustful and much more resolute in giving out large amounts of money, basically trusting the receivers of the money, whereas German foundations are much more tied up in programs, in procedure, in certain limited engagements. They are doing a lot. Germany is actually the largest donor of Ukraine, and there are lots of channels, lots of little programs, and the cultural life of Ukraine. The sort of developmental sector of Ukraine is full of German actors. And sometimes that is also forgotten in the US or in Canada, that Germany is extremely active in Ukraine, but the way these things happen in Germany are much more regulated, I would say, than in North America, where there's a different culture and also a different setup of the field. in terms of private foundations, taking quick decisions on large amounts of money. That is not usually what happens in Germany. Yes, I think that something that needs to be added to this is that the recent trouble between Germany and Russia about the delivery of weapons from Germany to Ukraine is this quarrel, I think, is unfortunate, and I think it's also too much escalated, I would say, from the Ukrainian side, in that indeed Germany has behaved here in a not very nice way, and it has also blocked the delivery of certain weapons from other countries towards Ukraine in a few singular cases. This is certainly to be criticized, but the more general issue of German deliveries of weapons to Ukraine should not be overemphasized, I think, in the German-Ukrainian relations, because Germany has a sort of a longer tradition of not delivering weapons, usually into conflict regions. And this sort of hesitant approach that Germany has now taken towards Ukraine in this question is not an expression of an anti-Ukrainian position. It's probably a wrong tradition that Germany has. In general, I think it's especially wrong with regard to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. But I think it has been overinterpreted in Ukraine and also in the Ukrainian diaspora as an expression of some sort of pro-Russian or pro-Putin and anti-Ukrainian sentiment in Germany. That is not there anymore, or it wasn't there, I think, ever. So one should be also careful here from the Ukrainian side not to spoil the Ukrainian-German relationships, which are going to be important in any way. Germany is just too large, and also Germany is a country that, for better or worse, is interested in Eastern Europe, that will be engaged in Eastern Europe. So I think for Ukraine, it's important to build and to develop and to preserve good relationships with Germany, and not seek sort of fields of disagreement, but rather seek fields of agreement and of cooperation. And Germany can cooperate and is helping already Ukraine in a whole number of ways. So I think that should be the emphasis of the German-Ukrainian relations, rather than discussing with Germans their probably wrong historical views and sort of general political positions that they've taken, for better or worse. So I think the Ukrainian side here too has to be sort of understanding that Germany has problems, but these problems are not of a principal nature, and the problem here is not some sort of anti-Ukrainian position of Germany.